Modern cars are some job, aren't they? Between fancy radio, central locking and a whole host of other features, they really are fantastic. But what if you prefer the character and the looks of your older car but want to have the amenities of a modern car? Well, in this series of 427 Motorsports, we're going to be taking our 90s rally icon, the Subaru Impreza Turbo, and turning it into a nice, modern daily driver, but keeping the retro characteristics that make it so iconic. Before we go any further, I hate to be that cliche YouTuber, but if you can click the subscribe button below, the big bright red button, it would really help us out and we'd really appreciate it. You can also check out our web store at 427motorsports.co.uk/store. We don't have a Patreon or anything, so all the money we get comes from our store, so we'd really appreciate it if you could, because it's all we do. So, as you can tell by the t-shirt, I'm a bit of a music fan, and old Radiohead units just do not cut it for me. I like having fancy stuff like Apple CarPlay and the likes. Now in my Mazda MX-5 I did have an Apple CarPlay radio, but I did find some of its functionality a bit limited, and I also thought the big screen on display was a bit of a thief magnet. So with a bit of creative thinking and some parts from Amazon and an iPad, I was able to make myself the ultimate infotainment center. Now, this isn't limited to this Subaru build. There are many different ways that you can do this. I've opted for this way because it's the way that I wanted. If you have something a bit more retro, like a classic Beetle or something like that, and you want to keep the dashboard looking factory and original, but you want to have the modern amenities of sat-nav, Bluetooth and all sorts, this is perfect for you because you don't have to have your screen on display. This way you can have your phone connected to it and it'll automatically work as you get into the car, and your screen is your phone and nobody will know any different. So to do this, you're gonna need some things. Now for mine, I opted for the latest iPad mini. Now the reason I went for the mini is it's much easier to fit into a space than the larger iPad. It's much more compact without being too small. Slightly bigger than a phone, but not quite as big as your average tablet. It's just about the right size for a double din, which is the term given to the space that a radio fits in. Next up, you're going to need an amplifier. Now I opted for this Alpine amplifier. Now it wasn't the cheapest, and you can also cancel out some of the steps required in this by getting an amplifier that has Bluetooth built in. However, these are much more expensive. This was a much cheaper alternative, so I stuck with it. I went for Alpine because, well, I played a lot of Need for Speed when I was younger and Alpine was one of the brands, so there you go. Marketing does work. Next up, you're going to need lots of speaker wire, depending on how you do this. Now, there are a lot of guides out there on how to wire in an amplifier. I'll give some slight basics on roughly what it does, but you are best checking out a video specifically for the amplifier section, regarding wiring in your speakers, what bridging means, and so on and so on. In mine, because I was doing a full rewire, I decided to just hardwire in my speakers myself with high quality speaker cable. This ensures that the quality is the best it can possibly be. Next up, you're going to need a Bluetooth receiver. Now I chose this One Me model and I've never heard of the brand before, but it works really well, and all it needs is a USB powered 12 volt source and your aux output. It does have an RCA cable fitting as well, but I didn't use that. I went for the aux method. Speaking of aux, you're then going to need an auxiliary to RCA cable, which is your normal headphone 3.5mm jack, I believe, which plugs into the back of the Bluetooth receiver and then splits it to the red and white RCA. This goes into your amplifier and so on. I'll explain that as we get further on. Next up, you're going to need the 12 volt to 5 volt converter. Now your Subaru or whatever car you're using likely runs on 12 volt, whereas your USB device runs on 5 volt, and if you try and put 12 volt into 5 volt, you're going to fry your electronics and you're going to be very annoyed. So you can get these little converter boxes, which basically take your red and black wires, your power and your ground from your car, you can wire it into anywhere you want, and converts it in this wee box to 5 volts and gives you 2 USB ports. Now this gives you 2 points of access for charging or powering your device. So once you've ordered that, you need to think about powering your iPad or your phone or whatever. You can leave this and just make sure you charge your device before you go out, but I knew I'd be doing big road trips, so I wanted to make sure I'd always have the power. So I got a right-angled USB lightning cable. Now the reason I got a right-angled one is because it makes it sit more flush, because the iPad is sitting at an angle. So with the right angle, it goes straight in. Then you won't have a cable all dangling around the place. Now, as for the iPad itself, as I was saying, I went for the mini. However, I also went for the highest spec one I could, cellular. Now, the reason I went for cellular is because I wanted to have all of my music streamable whenever I want. This is an infotainment center that I can use in any of my cars and in the house. So this means that no matter where I am, I will have access to my Spotify, to my YouTube, and so on. It also means that the car can be used as a Wi-Fi hotspot if you so wish. Now yes, this does bring on an extra cost of your SIM card monthly contract, but for me it was only £10 a month, which is worth it because that gave me unlimited everything. Which also reminds me to say that, you know, if you have a pre-existing head unit, yes, you can just connect your iPad to it via Bluetooth or USB, but I wanted this to be a head unit removal, so it's completely blank without it. What this also means is your head unit will never be outdated. Well, technically it will, but if you are upgrading your iPad anyway, or your phone, you're upgrading your entertainment system. So swings and roundabouts really. Now you can do a setup with a phone holder and you just hop into the car and put your phone in the phone holder and that's your radio. Or you can do what I did and 3D print a setup and have a mount for your iPad. There's many different ways of doing it. But we'll just get stuck straight in here and have a look at what we're doing. Now bear in mind, none of this is actually put away properly or finalized because I knew I'd be doing this video, so some of the wires and things look a bit messy, but they will be finished. Okay, so to start off, we'll be beginning at the back of the car. Now this is entirely up to what vehicle you are using and how you want your setup to be. I have opted to place my amplifier in the back here because I thought it might be handy for me to be able to pick and choose and mess about with settings on the fly as and when I need to. It also allows me to see the power and protect lights on the front. Now what these are basically a green light on the front to tell you when the power is on, and if there is a problem such as a short or God knows, there is a red light for the protect circuit. Now this is a safety circuit that your amplifier goes into to protect the internals because amplifiers ain't cheap, so they tend to look after themselves. So I like to be able to see at a glance whether something is wrong or not. Now when finding somewhere to put your amplifier, what you need to do is make sure there's enough room for air to circulate because they can overheat and cause damage. I have mounted mine here with a bit of a gap so that the air can pass through behind it and circulate around nice and easily. Now this mightn't suit everybody because this is in the way of the boot, to be fair, but I'm very cautious of where it is, so it's fine. Some people fit them under their seats, some people make full builds in the boot. It's entirely up to yourself, but this is what I liked and what suited me. If the wiring looks like a bit of a mess, that's because it is. This was my first time wiring in an amplifier, so I wasn't very good at making it tidy, but I did make it work. So I'm going to show you what all of these things mean on the back and how to wire it in yourself. So up here, this black and yellow wire, this is your earth. Now the earth basically is also known as ground, and this, well, it's just I don't know the science behind it, but it needs one. So what you're doing is you're wiring this to the nearest piece of bare metal or into the chassis or whatever. Basically, you need it to go to a ground. I have opted to wire it to the brake light. Now there is some bolts on it that go through the chassis and create a good earth, so I've wired it to that. This next one here is your remote. Now remote basically in this instance is another word for switched live. So what this is a feed of power that only comes on when you turn the key on or whenever you want the amplifier to work. If you want it on all the time to drain your battery, that's fine, just put a permanent live to it. However, I only wanted this to come on when the ignition comes on to save my battery from being drained. So I have wired this up to the front. Now a wire goes all the way up the car, up to where the radio used to be, because your radio also has a feed like this for the pre-existing standard head unit. When you turn the ignition on, the radio comes on. So I have this wired to that. The next one is the red one. Now this is your permanent live. Now this goes straight to the battery. Straight in, no kissing, straight into the battery. So one single wire continuously the whole way up the car to the battery. This is what gives your amplifier its full power. So this is always live, but It only takes advantage of this power whenever the remote wire tells it to. Next up, you have your speaker wires. Now, I have had to hardwire all 4 speakers just because I like the idea of doing it. Your build may not need you to do this, but I wanted to. So sometimes you can use your pre-existing wires, sometimes you can't. There are many guides online on how to wire in one of these, so you're best sticking to one of those. But for me, this is just straight wire to all 4 speakers. Now, there are instructions on the back regarding whether you're going front left, front right, rear left, rear right, and so on and so on. Follow your instructions on what way you want to wire those. Now, these are our inputs. Now, these RCA cables go into here and feed into our splitter. So this is your channel 1 left and right, and this is your channel 2 left and right. And 1 and 2 you can basically think of as front and rear. This is where you get your split. Now, unfortunately, by using the iPad, I think you can't mess about with the equalizer like you can in a normal car, which I know is a shame. There might be apps out there to do that. I don't know, I've never needed them. But this is a way of working out your front and rear balance. Now, I prefer more volume in the back, less in the front, because usually I don't have rear passengers, but I do have somebody in the passenger seat, which means it's quieter at the front so I can talk to them, and most of the volume is in the back. And then you'll have all of your generic amplifier settings and all, but again, stick to a video that's specifically about that to learn more there. Now, this splitter that these go into is our RCA to aux cable. Now, this is one big long cable, and do get a big long one because it gives you more room to make it tidy. This takes our feed from the Bluetooth receiver at the front and feeds it down to here. But we'll get into that now when we move up to the front. But that is everything we need to know about the amplifier side of things. Now it's time to move up front to behind the dash and work out what we're going to do up there. Okay, so now we're up front and it's time to basically disassemble your interior. Up here is where we're going to use our 12 volt to USB converters to power our iPad charger, our Bluetooth receiver, and in my instance, a wireless charger and a spare USB port. However, I'll do another video on those. So here we have our Bluetooth receiver. This is a 1Me, and I have no idea what that means, and it's a terrible name, but I know that it's a good product. The Bluetooth range is incredibly good. We're sitting in the car here, and I'm able to walk into the garage or into the house, which is quite a few meters away, and the signal is still perfectly clear. So this is our aux to RCA adapter. Remember I talked about the lead that goes all the way up the front to here? Well, this is what it plugs into. And this is our power source. Now this plugs into our USB end. And to be honest, that's about all there is to do with this. So we'll just put that out of the way. Now, up here is where you're going to do most of your wiring and your foodering around. And 2 tools that I find to be the most used for this is this set of crimpers, which are very cheap and I recommend getting. These are for stripping wires and for crimping little tools on and all sorts. They are a lifesaver. As well as this is this little device here. Now this is one of my favorite tools. This is for helping you find power sources. So we are looking for something that only gets power whenever the ignition is turned on. So we attach this to an earth. For example, back here we have a bolt going to something. Turn our ignition on. And now we're looking for something that gets power when the ignition is on. So for example, I already know that this wire here gets power. Now you can just about see it, but if I attach this, you can see that that is getting power. However, if I turn the ignition off, the power goes away. Perfect. Now this wasn't going to anything, so I can use this without worrying. So we took our 12 volt to 5 volt converter and we used that power source to power. And then we just earthed the other side, and then we have 2 USB ports. One is for charging the iPad so that whenever it's plugged in, or whenever you're in the car, you can always have it plugged in. And the other is to power our Bluetooth device. So what this does is, once we have it all powered up, when you turn your ignition on in the car, this automatically turns on. I picked this one specifically because it will automatically turn on when it receives power. Some of them you will have to press the power button, whereas that was really annoying for me. I wanted it to automatically come on, kind of like when you get into a modern car, turn the key on and the radio automatically comes on. That's what I was looking for. So you come in, turn the key on, this turns on, starts the Bluetooth process, your iPad or phone or whatever you like automatically connects to it, and you've instantly got tunes. Now the reason I've opted for this approach is because I wanted it to be very easy for anybody in the car to control the music. You are limited with an aux cable to how long your aux is, same with a USB, whereas this can go anywhere in the car with no wires to worry about. So if you're on a road trip with your friends, whoever's in the back can control the music. So what we do now is make sure everything's plugged in and we tuck it all away. You can cable tie all your cables up if you wish, or you can leave it as it is. It's entirely up to yourself. I haven't because I couldn't be bothered, and I knew I'd be doing a video on it and I'd have to take it all back out again, so I didn't think there was much point. But you just tuck all that in away, out of the way. One handy method is to just tuck it down in to the carpets because it'll protect them and they're not likely to move. Okay, so now you've got your interior mostly back together, what we need to do is think about how the hell are we going to actually mount this iPad. Now, there are many different ways to do this and it depends entirely on what you want to go for. You might want to have anything on display and just a blank, and maybe you just want to use your phone in your phone holder and that's it. Then you'll have less things attractive to thieves to steal and so on. If you're doing this in something older, like an old Volkswagen, a classic or something like that, you want to keep the retro look, you're going to keep your old radio on display and hide your iPad somewhere and just use it when you want to. However, I wanted this to be more like a modern car, so I did a bit of footering. I wanted my screen to be on display like in a modern car, however, I wanted to be able to remove it because, you know, thieves see an iPad on display, they might think, oh, I'm having that. So I wanted a nice faceplate that hid all of these wires, but also made it nice and easy for my iPad to be removable. As well as this, I needed a way to be able to charge my iPad because I'll be doing big road trips and I can't always guarantee that my phone or my iPad will be charged. So now I know not all of you are going to have a setup like this, but I used a 3D printer and took the measurements. I will be using an iPad mini. So I took the measurements of the iPad mini and then made this to go around it. Now it's still on the rough 3D print stage, it could do with being tidied up, but it does the job for me. So what we have here are two tabs which can be rotated. Now these can be rotated to make it easier to get the iPad in and out. What we also have is this lead hole. Now this means that the lead from the iPad, now I chose a right angled one to keep it nice and tight, this can fit through the hole and be easily fed through or shoved back in and kept tight. As well as this, I put two screw holes here and I put the Subaru logo in, so when the iPad is not in the car and it's sitting there, there's just a nice big blank. So those who don't know anything about Subarus might see that and think, huh, he doesn't even have a radio. And this pops nicely into here. Those of you who have a Subaru might notice that there are some things missing here. Now this is a UK spec Subaru, so there should be some buttons and switches here. However, to make this a nice clean install, I have extended the wires of the buttons and fed them under the steering column and to the right hand side where there were previously blanks. As well as this, I've also removed the ashtray and 12 volt socket because I don't use them. You can use the 12 volt socket as a power source for this, however. It all depends on how you want to do it. Now, if you are doing the clean approach where you can't see your iPad and it's just a plain display, you don't have to worry about any of this, but I wanted a more tidy thing. And I have relocated my 12 volt socket, which I'll do in another video. This did, because this is a turbo and is quite fast, this kept popping out of place. So these are the factory screw holes. So I have made it so that this will screw into the factory holes. Like so. So not only is it factory screw holes, but it's the factory screws as well. Now you don't see these most of the time. So this cable can be pulled out and goes back in and your install is pretty tidy. And then all of the wires in behind cannot be seen and your install is basically complete. All that's left is to turn on the key, connect your iPad to the Bluetooth, and you are sorted. So, realistically, that's all there is to it. I know it seems a wee bit complicated at times and a wee bit too simple at times, but really it's not that hard of a task. Most of my time doing this was actually spent wiring in everything and finding the products themselves in the first place. I didn't know a lot of these things existed, and then I was doing research on the amplifiers to find the best ones and so on, but I'll put links in the description of each product that I purchased so you can guarantee you're going to get something good. I'm not making any money from these Amazon links, so this is purely just trying to help you out. So if you haven't already, please subscribe to the channel. It would really help us out, and it also means you'll get to see the next steps in how I've modernized this 90s icon to become the perfect daily driver. I've been Tomo Pattison. Be sure to check me out on Instagram at tomo.pattison. Follow Connor on Instagram at Hughes Corporation, and stick around for the next one. Cheers and good luck.